Brazil under pressure, blockade rumors, sanctions, hybrid warfare, and technological vulnerability. Welcome to the Geopolitics Update channel. Friday, November 28, 2025. Rumors from Washington suggest that new sanctions could be applied against Brazil. Among the hypotheses raised by analysts, one of the most alarming would be the blocking of the Global Positioning System, GPS. Although treated as speculation, the issue gained relevance after statements by U.S. authorities and international reports. The mere possibility of cutting access to such a vital infrastructure exposes Brazil's technological dependence and opens space for debates about the real strategic objectives of the United States. GPS, controlled by the U.S. Department of Defense, is essential for civil aviation, maritime transport, telecommunications, financial systems, electricity, and precision agriculture. Analysts recall that Washington has already reduced signals in conflict zones in the Middle East, demonstrating technical capacity to restrict access in specific areas. However, applying a measure of this magnitude against a major country would be unprecedented, an act of hybrid warfare with significant economic and geopolitical repercussions. The discussion arises amid the application of the Magnitsky Act, which since July 2025 has already targeted Brazilian authorities accused of human rights violations. Experts describe the law as a financial sentence that intensifies over time. The expectation is that after 120 days from the first imposition, new sanctions may be announced. In this context, blocking GPS appears as a possible escalation, reinforcing the perception that Brazil could be the target of harsher measures. While part of the national media treats the issue as speculation, analysts warn that the hypothesis cannot be dismissed. Recent speeches by U.S. authorities mentioned the possibility of cutting strategic services in countries considered human rights violators. This narrative fuels the idea that Brazil is in Washington's sights, and that GPS could be used as a tool of political pressure. This reveals a Brazil vulnerable to a threat that transcends traditional diplomacy. The risk of GPS blocking, even as a rumor, exposes technological dependence and institutional fragility. More than a technical issue, it is a warning about how hybrid wars can be waged without firing a single shot, yet with an impact capable of paralyzing entire sectors of the economy and society. Brazil appears as a fragile piece on an increasingly hostile global chessboard. The possibility of blocking the Global Positioning System, GPS, by the United States, even if treated as a hypothesis, exposes the country's technological dependence and institutional vulnerability. In a hyperconnected world, the interruption of essential services would not be just an inconvenience, it could trigger a chain collapse, affecting vital sectors and putting national stability itself at risk. GPS, controlled by the U.S. Department of Defense, is the invisible heart that sustains civil aviation, maritime transport, telecommunications, financial systems, electricity, and precision agriculture. If blocked, the impacts would be immediate and devastating. Air and maritime routes would be compromised, putting lives at risk. The armed forces would lose strategic coordination capacity. Internet networks and mobile telephony would suffer severe failures, since they depend on satellite time synchronization. Even the financial system, which validates transactions based on time markers, could collapse, paralyzing credit cards, bank transfers, and stock exchanges. The cascading effect would extend to electricity, with substations unable to balance distribution, causing large-scale blackouts. Precision agriculture, dependent on geolocation to guide tractors and drones, would face shutdowns, compromising production and logistics. In urban daily life, transport and delivery apps would stop working, amplifying the social impact. It would be a scenario of silent chaos, in which the absence of satellite signals would turn into national paralysis. Analysts note that Brazil does not have a contingency plan capable of replacing GPS in the short term. Alternative systems, such as Europe's Galileo or China's PDU, are not fully integrated into national operations. Investments in research and cybersecurity are discussed, but insufficient in the face of an immediate blockade. The absence of strategy reinforces the perception of technological fragility and external dependence. Diplomatically, the risk is amplified by the application of the Magnitsky Act against Brazilian authorities, showing that measures once considered unlikely can become reality. Blocking GPS, even if improbable, emerges as a symbol of hybrid warfare in which economic and technological pressures replace military confrontations. For Washington, preserving influence in Latin America is a priority, and Brazil may be the target of preventive actions to avoid strategic alignments with rival powers. This reveals that the GPS threat is not merely technical. It is an instrument of power capable of paralyzing entire sectors and exposing national weaknesses. Brazil, without immediate alternatives, faces a strategic warning that forces reflection on technological autonomy and the risks of confronting more powerful adversaries in a scenario of global disputes. Brazil is going through a moment of instability that combines internal risks with external pressures. Its confrontational posture toward Washington increases the perception that harsher sanctions could be applied, including the possibility of blocking GPS. Although considered remote, this scenario reinforces Brazil's technological dependence and exposes strategic vulnerabilities that could be exploited in a hybrid warfare context. Internally, tension is rising with the fragile health of former President Jair Bolsonaro, currently imprisoned. Analyses and reports mention complications stemming from the 2018 attack, heightening concern about his clinical condition. Experts assess that any deterioration could provoke an immediate popular reaction, altering the political balance within hours. The historical parallel with 1954 is recurrent. The suicide of Getulio Vargas reversed public opinion and plunged the country into instability. This example reinforces the idea that personal tragedies can become catalysts for national crises. Intermediate sectors of society, which oscillate between different political camps, are seen as key pieces on this chessboard. A sudden shift in their stance could increase pressure on authorities and institutions, with impact not only domestically but also internationally. Public opinion, volatile and unpredictable, is pointed out as a factor capable of redefining political scenarios within days. On the external front, expectations grow that the United States will intensify measures against governments considered close to rival powers such as China. Preserving influence in Latin America is a strategic priority for Washington, and Brazil emerges as a potential target of preventive actions. In this context, the hypothesis of additional sanctions gains strength, reinforcing the climate of uncertainty. Strategic analysis draws on the art of war by Sun Tzu to remind that confrontations against more powerful adversaries tend to result in defeat. Insisting on disputes without the capacity for victory is seen as a high risk. Rash decisions could generate irreversible consequences, compromising national stability and amplifying the perception of fragility. This shows a Brazil pressured both internally and externally. Bolsonaro's health acts as a trigger for political tension, while the possibility of US sanctions amplifies technological vulnerability. Historical parallels reinforce that sudden shifts in public opinion can redefine scenarios. The future will depend on the authorities' ability to manage internal and external pressures without plunging the country into irreversible crisis. In the external scenario, the perception grows that the United States will not allow Brazil to strategically align with rival powers such as China. Preserving influence in Latin America is a priority for Washington, and analysts assess that preventive measures may be adopted to contain any shift in alignment. In this context, Brazil emerges as a potential target of additional pressures, reinforcing the climate of uncertainty and instability. The narrative takes on contours of hybrid warfare. It is not necessary to fire a shot to weaken an adversary. Economic sanctions, technological blockades, and diplomatic isolation function as silent weapons, capable of paralyzing entire sectors and eroding institutional confidence. Brazil, dependent on external systems such as GPS, appears vulnerable to this type of strategy. Insisting on disputes without the capacity for victory is seen as a high risk. Rash decisions could generate irreversible consequences, compromising national stability and amplifying the perception of fragility. Brazil faces a geopolitical dilemma: resist external pressures or recalibrate its strategic position. Bolsonaro's health, the volatility of public opinion, and the possibility of harsher sanctions intertwine in a framework of instability. The future will depend on the authorities' ability to manage internal and external risks, preventing the country from becoming an example of how hybrid wars can destroy nations without a single shot being fired. End of the report, folks. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join the conversation in the comments. If you'd like to support us directly, consider making a donation using the link in the description or the QR code on screen. Your contribution helps us work better, and keeps this project alive and independent. Thank you so much. And see you in the next report. This content is a narrative adaptation based on public themes of global geopolitics. The version presented has been transformed with a unique style, based on public information, analysis, and opinions, and is intended solely to inform and entertain.